Hey, it's Tweeter's Digest, the podcast that's optimized for survival. Episode 10, Visa is playing a very long game. Hi, Visa. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Hey, Loopy, it's fun.
So before we get into this stuff, I'd first love to know, what have you been up to lately?
What have I been up to? Really, the main thing has been that I've been thinking about the essays that I have been planning to write or I have been working on. And I'm just mainly just that actually. I have a lot of notes, a lot of drafts. And so for the past few years, I've mainly been working on my second book, Introspect, and that's done. So it's been like, what's next? Right? What do I do? Like, I'm tweeting all the time, sure, but like, I want to write a bunch of essays that I feel have more substance, more shareable with a broader audience than just my Twitter friends. And so I'm just trying to think really hard about how to do that well, and it's consuming all of my time and energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually listened or watched your recent YouTube video, either yesterday, maybe 2 days ago for you, about like a rant about essays. What's sailing for that for me right now is the point you made about wanting to play a sort of like counter melody to
Mhm.
maybe other essayists. Let me know if I'm interpreting what you
Yeah,
said correctly, but
correct.
there's a form and structure to essays, and you want to do a sort of, as you said, counter melody.
Yeah. Uh, I hope to do it at every level, which might be a bit too ambitious because it might be that, I think the insight that I had was that I'm trying so hard to try and be fresh on every dimension, and that might not actually be realistic. It might not even actually be desirable because you might have to first kind of do something somewhat familiar, right? So same for, if you think about movies or TV shows or whatever, like you do still have to follow some familiar tropes so that when you do choose to deviate, people know what you're deviating from. Like otherwise it's total chaos if it's completely incomprehensible, right? So I it's fun to think about being deviant on every dimension, but that is indistinguishable from chaos. So now I need to kind of move my boat back somewhere comprehensible and in between. So that's fun.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I'm curious, like, do you anticipate the ideal reader of your essays would know your canon before digesting the next one? Or could
No,
they like,
yeah, so that's a good question and it's tricky. I think ideally not really. So I do want to write for new audiences that are not familiar with my work. uh and that's a challenge because especially so I've been tweeting so much for like years now, right? And I on Twitter I get to enjoy this familiarity where I can just say stuff that the people who have been replying to my tweets for years are familiar with. And I'm reminded of a quote from Huxley where he says, "We are both I'm paraphrasing, but he says like we are both kind of the benefactors and the prisoners of our linguistic traditions." So it's like we benefit from that familiarity, but that familiarity is also kind of a prison that you operate within that space and you don't go outside of it that much. And I want to it's a challenge, right? Trying to figure out how to say new things that are nonetheless comprehensible. And yeah, so I've been thinking I want to reach people who are not familiar with my work, but I don't want to kind of in that process be too risk averse and end up saying things that it's the same thing everyone else is saying and it's the same, looks the same, sounds the same, the form and content is the same. uh I think I probably worry too much about that because even when I do try to if I were to try and do the same thing, I'd probably still do it differently in ways that I don't anticipate. But it's just something I think about a lot.
yeah, interesting to see where that takes you into next year.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I have your tweets.
Mm-hmm.
On July 6th, 2019, you tweeted, "Since I haven't used this alt in months, I'm switching and rebranding. This is now Dark Visa. Dark v Dark visa principles. 1. Existence is fundamentally meaningless. 2. Justice is poetic fiction, an ideal worth striving for, but there's nothing about the universe that guarantees it. 3. Most people are too busy and tired to really give a fuck about you unless you earn their love.
Yeah, I those are all, I think those are all true in their own sense, and it's the kind of thing that I do actually think about fairly often and comes up in conversation even, but it's difficult to accurately or adequately represent on main with my existing kind of persona. And so it was just easier to, I'm sure you can actually find tweets on main where I do allude to these things, but I tend not to start with them. And so it was just, I just wanted to, given the, so actually this is an interesting example of a counter, what I mean by counter melody, right? So like it would surprise some people to hear these things from me. And the level of surprise kind of depends on their level of intimacy, familiarity with the depth of the stuff I've said. But again, like on Twitter, for example, people are scrolling, right? So they don't necessarily sit down and think about what they're reading and what the implications are. But yeah, I must have felt constrained by the way I was tweeting on main, and so given the opportunity to try and say different things, this is what I came up with.
Yeah, I think what I'm about to say will be maybe a through line for our conversation here. A curiosity I have is it's the fact that, the fact this exists on your alt, this tweet, and not your main is like part of the message, I feel like. It seems like you try to cultivate an audience of like intentional and informed readers, like people who aren't just like looking to dunk on you or looking to like get their own voice in there. They want to like do a careful reading of what you have to say. Yeah. How do you do that on Twitter? Because, the nature of the medium is read 1,000 tweets all at once. I think ideally you may want someone to pay attention to these principles and really think about them, like chew on them for a bit. But people may just see them as like, something in the bathroom or one of 1,000 tweets they're going to read right then.
Right. Yeah, I guess it's, what was the question again? Like, how do I think about it?
I guess like, how do you handle that tension of like wanting to communicate ideas very specifically on Twitter and have an audience that receives them in good faith? That tension with the nature of Twitter as a medium where, people read something, move on to the next thing, not really take the time to chew on a tweet that you would want them to really think about and consider.
Oh, yeah. I just, tweet for the audience you want, right? So I pretty much assume that I will eventually be seen by someone that I want to be seen by, and I'm very okay with people not getting it and just kind of misunderstanding it or whatever. I mean, it's annoying to be misunderstood, but or misread. But I basically just focus on the people that I trust must exist, and even if it's like a very small handful, I'm willing to like wait it out. And it's kind of a thing that is easier to say in conversation than on Twitter, for example, is that I should not be as successful as I am at what I have done. Like it's a bit of a narrative violation. And so the default assumption is that Twitter is not a thoughtful place. Like you if you were to start something like what I did, like from scratch amongst people who haven't seen anything like it before, I think the default assumption would be like, that's like you're trying to have a snowball fight in hell or something. Like you're trying to do something that goes against the grain of what the thing is, right? The assumption is of like the mainstream assumption tend to be, Twitter is a shit fight. Like it's just people are just gonna go crazy each other, and like trying to seek out sensible voices on a place like that seems ill-advised. But I sometimes describe this as the Times Square problem, which is like it's like people seeing Times Square, which is like loud and garish and lots of billboards and people selling overpriced trinkets to tourists. I haven't actually been, but that's what I assume it's like. And then saying, oh, this is what New York is like. Like, no, that's this it is a part of what New York is like. It's the main street, it's the main it's kind of where all the media attention is focused, but it's not representative of the whole. And there's always, if you go down a couple of streets, you can encounter a completely different universe. And so yeah, I think my long experience just being online and encountering, you find a comment section somewhere in some subreddit or even on YouTube videos, sometimes you just find people having very thoughtful conversations. So it's possible. So, my sense is like, if it's possible for that to happen, then it should be possible to happen deliberately. If you are, you can't have it necessarily on demand in any given moment. But if you insist that that's what you want and you keep asking for it, eventually you will encounter someone who is also interested in the same thing and is willing to give it a try, right? So, yeah. But even then, I guess, there are things that it's just kind of challenging or difficult to attempt in a context that isn't friendly to it by nature. But it's worth trying. So you try to find some compromise in between. So I don't bother trying to have civil conversations about politics on Twitter. Like, it's just not. I don't think it's even worth trying. Or you could say that I'm playing a very long game. So I'm like recruiting people that I want to have those conversations with down the line, maybe somewhere else, maybe on podcasts, maybe, right? Like, so it's being somewhat deliberate and making some compromises, but being clear about what you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the idea of like persistence or just repeatedly expressing how you want to participate in the like public square there. That seems like a good strategy. Glad you've kept up with it as long as you have. Into like the meat of what you actually tweeted there, you said justice is poetic fiction. What is justice to you?
What is justice to me? It's an ideal, it's a thing that we strive for as a species, but it doesn't exist. There's this great like Terry Pratchett quote, I think, from one of his books, where it's like, like, find me an atom of justice and of a bunch of other, freedom, liberty, whatever. Like, there are all these things that we say and that we feel, but don't exist in like material reality outside of our imagination, right? Like, we feel it. We feel a sense of injustice when we are being treated unfairly, right? So that's a very intuitive, emotional, probably like limbic system. I know there's like, even like monkeys feel it. Like, they've done these experiments, and these experiments are always questionable, but like they did some elaborate thing where a monkey performs some task and gets some reward, and then they see some other monkey perform some other task and get a much more disproportionate reward or something, and then they get very angry about it because it's unfair. And so there is some sense, in a very immediate, grounded kind of sense of what justice is like at that level. But then as you get to more and more abstract and complex levels, like how should resources be allocated in a society, right? Like, it's very subjective. It's very open to interpretation. People don't even know what they mean when they're saying it. And so I think capital J justice is like that whole endeavor, right? So I don't think, like, so some, like, when you think about laws and judges and courts and everything, some people see that and they see authority that is like the final arbiter of justice, right? Like, oh, if it's legal, it's just; if it's illegal, it's not. Like, that's a very simplistic and like ahistorical kind of mindset. It's convenient, it's easy, but the reality of it is that the laws are just a bunch of stuff a bunch of people made up and enforce. And we know from history that over time we come to new consensus about, oh, this law is bullshit, like, it's not fair, it's not whatever, and then we adapt and evolve. So I think we should think of it more as like an ongoing process of how we figure stuff out, and it's justice is consensus, right? Which is again like what justice as practiced is consensus. it could be that we are able to imagine some ideal, and again, different people have different imaginations and different ideas of what they want to see. But yeah, so that's what I mean by fiction as well. And I don't mean that like dismissively. I mean like all of humanity's greatness is in our ability to imagine beautiful outcomes, conditions, contexts, and stuff, and aspire towards those things and work towards those things. But yeah, like the kind of edgelordy teenage angsty but true perspective is that it's all made up. You can't, you shouldn't assume that justice will be served, because it might not be, right? And maybe it will be served after you're dead, like, or maybe lifetimes later. Sometimes you exonerate people, but people are human and they have their interpretations and their biases and assumptions, and so it's good to I think it's good for an individual in the world trying to just live, right, kind of sensibly, to know that justice is, in that sense, fiction.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny, like hearing all this feels like the conversational version of the Heart of Philosophy, A. Lamau, Dragon's Whirlpool. This is in conversation form. Okay, yeah. Appreciate the thorough definition there. Let's go ahead and move on to your next tweet.
Let's do it.
On June 26th, 2020, you tweeted, "The spine of a book wants to be broken. Its pages thirst for the oil of your skin. Time, light, and air will come for us all. You might as well get some reading in."
Whoa, that's good. Spine broken. I'm looking this up now, trying to find it. Is this on my main? Where is this?
I'll just send you the link.
That's good.
There you go.
Yeah, I even just hearing this is like, this is, I think like this sometimes. Like, it's just the thoughts just come to my mind or while I'm writing, and I might not post it on main because it seems some people will see it as pretentious. I mean, now that I read it, I'm like, oh, yeah, I could post this on main. It's not a big deal. But I don't even think it that much when I'm in that headspace of my main. But yeah, I love books. I love poetry. I love, and I like how this kind of starts a bit dramatic, and then it ends kind of matter of fact. It's just a bit like a children's book kind of vibe. I like this. It's a nice tweet. It's it's nice. It's nice to rediscover like a forgotten tweet, and I think it captures my personality quite well. One of my friends, Tashin, he commented on one of my YouTube videos something like, it's nice how you are so like earnest, kind of serious, and also playful. And I'm like, yeah, that seems like a contradiction in terms, but I don't think it is. I think they come together very nicely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I also think this is a great tweet, like a nice little pair of like couplets. So, and it stands out to me just because it's so atypical for the sorts of things you tweet. Like, it's kind of like poetry, like fiction, like you said, like kind of like a children's short tale thing. So my question about this is why not more? Why is this so rare? Why don't we see more of this sort of visa writing elsewhere? As far as maybe you have a hidden stash somewhere, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I mean, it must be the context that I'm operating in that, so it's not like I think this and then write it and then don't tweet it. No, it's likelier that I'm just thinking about other things, and so it doesn't come up. And yeah, even just looking at this, I'm like, oh, I wish I did more of this. I should inhabit. It would be nice to inhabit this headspace more. But yeah, I'm elsewhere. I think I've said stuff like I feel sometimes like I'm too much person for one meat bag. Like, it's just I wish I could be running all of these different instances at the same time. And also, this is why I say, like, I'm not worried about like AI generated stuff, because again, if you could perfectly simulate my main and have that be churning out Visakan tweets daily without my input, great, I can do other stuff now. Right? I can do more of this, right? And then if you automate this somehow, which I don't think will happen, but if it does, then I can just spend time thinking about what's next and just keep going to the next thing.
Okay, so it sounds like to me, you've calculated or deduced that the best sort of use of your time, at least for now, is to focus on nonfiction, on essays over, or more so than over poetry or fiction. Because I remember at some point you've also mentioned maybe on Maine an inkling of like an interest in like writing like a grand, whatever, Game of Thrones-esque, multi-book fictional story. I would hope it eventually some more fleshed out ideas there see the light of day.
I think it'll happen, and one of the things there is that I think I get so I do wish I wrote more fiction in my drafts. Like I write, so even in my drafts, I write less fiction than I would like, and I feel like I've made some minor progress on how I think about that, and I think the secret is to think in frame stories. So a frame story is like a story within a story, right? So if you go with like the 1001 Nights with Shahrazad, and it's a lot like Sinbad the Sailor is like this. I don't know if Moby Dick is like this, but very often like there are these stories where it's like you open the book and like the first character you're introduced to is about to tell you about how someone else once told them a story, and then that's the actual story, right? And this is a very smart thing to do, because as you go in layer by layer, you kind of get further away from the author's persona, or the real life author, right? Like, and ultimately people will still associate the novel or whatever with the author, but there's something of an impasse there that needs to be crossed. I don't know if that's the right word choice, but there's something that, like a chasm that's difficult to cross. And like so when you're tweeting, especially if you have like a largish audience and you're using your name and face, you're gonna, every single thing that you tweet, or at least for me, right, like it goes through a filter of how whatever I say now, like somebody is gonna interpret this through, what does he mean by this? What does he want to get out of this? Is he trying to, is he jostling for status? Is he trying to prove a point? Is he trying to, like what is the goal, the author's personal goal here? And I think that that state of mind inhibits writing like good, honest fiction. I think good, honest fiction should come from a space of just tell the truth about, and like, and this kind of not necessarily like the truth of your personal life, but there is some kind of this nebulous state that is just difficult to access when you are concerned about your reputation sounds a bit, doesn't quite sound like what I mean, although that's a part of it. But like you have to transcend yourself somewhat, I think, to write good fiction. And I have, in my attempts to do it, whenever I'm sitting down writing, I do dislike how much I find myself orienting around myself. I don't like it. I would prefer not to give a shit about it. But long habit, or but I think the way around that is frame stories. So instead of thinking what kind of story is Visa writing, I'm like, okay, so Visa invented this character, and what kind of story is that character writing? Like, so it's not on me, it's on that guy, this fictitious person. And I mean, that's also why people use pen names, right? You use a pen name so that people don't associate it with you. And it's not that you don't necessarily want to be associated with it, but you just don't want your personal baggage to cloud the work.
Yeah, that's interesting, like point or usefulness for frame stories I never really considered. Although there's like an analogous way to do it on Twitter too, where you just say like my friend, and then whatever happened to you, actually, then so if that gets dunked on or that gets like praised, like it's removed from you because just whatever happened to your friend.
Yeah. Or people say things like I just overheard someone say this, or even just someone says it's all these ways. There are all these ways to kind of decenter yourself, sort of. Yeah.
Again, just like great little poem. I just really enjoyed happening upon this. Next tweet. On March 30th, 2021, you tweeted, starting to realize that my status / posture / charisma hypothesis has taken me past mainstream commonplace understanding. Should probably write a blog post or make a video about this.
Is this on my main? Oh, also alt.
It's all alt.
I want to read it. Charisma hypothesis. Status, posture, charisma. I mean, I've done subsequent tweets about it on alt, I think. And I think it's also come through on my main as well. And yeah, I think it's true. I think people don't embody an understanding of how status really works. No, let me rephrase that. There exists. So I guess the tricky thing, like there's this funny XKCD comic I saw recently that, again, there's like it's two, I think, geologists or chemists, two chemists having a conversation, and they're like, oh, we shouldn't assume that laypersons will know more than A, B, C, D, E. And then they're like, oh yeah, they would only know A, B, C, D, E. And it's like all of those concepts are stuff that nobody knows, and then the caption is like, when experts think that they are accounting for their expertise, they still vastly overestimate what like mainstream audiences know. And it's funny because like once you know a thing and it's true, or it seems true, it seems useful, it becomes obvious. There's this great blog post by Jiggity K, Jong Moon something. His username is Jiggity K, and he says that everything I'm paraphrasing, but like everything effective and useful becomes obvious in retrospect, because it's to do with like how intuitive it is and how much value it creates. And so, like a lot of what we use as technology today, like now seems so obvious that would not have seemed obvious at all before they were invented. It's just that when it's so useful, you get so much value out of it, it expands to take up that much of your kind of headspace and your behavior space or whatever. And similarly, I struggle with this sometimes because I've thought about these things so much for so long, and I discuss them with people who have also thought about these things, and amongst us, these things feel obvious, and then it becomes challenging to know to what degree is our understanding kind of deviant from the norm. With regards to like status, I think people, again, it's like a monkey brain kind of thing where people can feel when someone is high status, and they have some intuitive sense of that. But what seems obvious to me after lots of study, which I don't know if it's obvious or not, is just the ways in which it can be kind of transmuted and managed and moved around. Maybe another way of thinking about this is that, like, think of like someone who does parkour, right? Like someone who's just very physically nimble, and they can just climb and jump and roll and everything. And when you watch them, everything they do is so intuitive. It's so, minimum effort, maximum kind of elegance, no wasted energy. Everything is just smooth and beautiful. And you look at that, and you're like, oh yeah, that's so nice. It's so artful. But the average person is not so artful. And now, is that because and the average person today lives in modern civilization and cities? We sit in chairs all day, right? Like, so to what degree is our lack of elegance in movement like what is the default? Can we discern what a default human kind of agility is like because now the average person is sedentary, right? And so there's something of this that maps onto like status, I think. And I am probably overestimating the degree to which people have thought about these things and understand it and feel it. But to me, I feel like it seems obvious that everyone wants it to some degree, and people get conflicted because they want the trappings of it, they want the upside, they don't want the downside. And so everyone's kind of internally conflicted about this to a degree that they don't realize themselves. They might not realize themselves. So people think they want to be successful and more famous, more wealthy, blah blah blah, But in practice, they have internal like regulations that protect them from going that far. So they don't ask for more money, or they don't. There's all kinds of things that they don't ask for because like they don't want to be seen asking for it as well, even to themselves. And yeah, so there are layers and layers to this. But it's slightly complicated, but it's not that complicated. And if people really do want it, it's there for the taking. And so I'm still kind of figuring out what I think about, or where I stand on my understanding of it is like, so should I talk about this? And is it worthwhile to talk about it? I think yes. But I guess I'm still finding my positions. I'm still kind of orienting. But yeah, it feels crazy sometimes how many things people talk about as though it's intractable, like a done or like it's a matter of luck, or it's a matter of so I casually believe that almost any, let's say, any thoughtful person, right? That's the phrase I use. Any thoughtful person should be able to become more successful on almost any dimension that they care about. And like when you say that, people are like, oh yeah, that sounds true. But do you believe it? Because there's this superficial layer of belief that's like, oh yeah, it sounds true. But like, does it inform the way you conduct yourself? Because if it doesn't, then you don't really believe it in that sense. And it's funny because with a lot of like mainstream social values, like, oh, honesty is a good thing, optimism is a good thing. We should teach our kids to be curious, right? Like, so yeah, honesty, optimism, curiosity. There's a bunch of other stuff as well. But like even just these three things, everyone broadly says that they are good things, because I think it's because it just seems like a good thing to say. But very few people have really sat down and considered why they are good and how they are good, and what it means to prioritize those things as values. Because you can be honest in a way that gets you branded as untrustworthy, because you're pointing out things that people don't want to hear pointed out, and you don't keep secrets, or you this like part of one of my things is that society is social fabric is built on polite fictions. And if you violate people's polite fictions in an unartful way, so if you do it artfully, you can be like a comedian, right? And Oscar Wilde was an example of someone who was very truthful in a comedic way, and people loved him for it for a long time, up until the point where they didn't, right? So that's very tricky stuff. And it's like with these things, and so I'm sitting here looking at the world, right? Looking at people and what they say they value, and what happens to people who actually value those things, and there's that disconnect. And I believe that it should be possible to get people in alignment with their stated values. And I do believe that those things are actually valuable and powerful, even, and that so if we go by those things, honesty, curiosity, optimism, if you have a cluster of people who actually mean what they say when they say they value those things, and they practice those values amongst themselves, what you get is a very productive scene. You get people who continually kind of level up and challenge each other and become and produce wealth, like real, like all. If you examine any great scene in history, it's basically a group of people who were disproportionately honest and curious and optimistic around each other, with each other, about their work. And but when you try to get people, the thing is, and there's a lot of like fiction to explore this and stuff, right? Like the thing is, the distance between people's stated values and their actual values is where like the tension is. And people can hate you for trying to nudge them towards like if you kind of interrogate someone about their values, it can be offensive. And I've lost friends before for asking them why they don't behave in the way that they've said they wanted to behave, right? Like, so I mean, like, simplistically, like, someone says, oh, let's like, so very casual, like somebody saying, I want to get fit, let's work out, and let's eat healthy. And then you're like, hey, how come you weren't at the gym today? Or how come you're eating stuff that you said you weren't going to eat? And then it's like, they're like, get off my back, man. But so it's like, are you committed to the thing that you say you're committed to or not? And all of this is just a very long-winded way of talking about, again, so with the status thing and posture and charisma, it's like, I have an understanding that works for me. I want to share this understanding with people that I think it's worth sharing with. I think there is this, and maybe I'm like over analytical or over cautious, but I don't think you can be over cautious as long as you keep moving. But like, it is possible it's adjacent to a dark art, and I think anything powerful is adjacent to a dark art. Like, so with any, curiosity, you just ask, like, you're asking questions. It seems like it's good, but a person who asks quote unquote too many questions, they end up being like an investigative journalist, and investigative journalists get killed, like for uncovering fraud or whatever. Like, so there are these boundaries, and the value is past the boundaries, but there's also danger. And I want to be clear-eyed about what the danger is, so that I don't get fucked up somehow in some way that I don't anticipate. But in some way, you can never really know for sure, because it's beyond the threshold of your knowledge and whatever. So it's risky. I think the way to do it is somewhat obliquely, so you have some plausible deniability. And yeah, it's interesting. I haven't actually even discussed this in much detail with anyone recently, but it's the kind of thing I think about all the time. Like, I feel like if you do it really well, you have a chance of teaching a bunch of people how to acquire status. And that's a powerful, scary thing. Because what if you teach someone and turns out they are like broken inside and they've hidden it from you very well, and now they become very high status, and now they get to prey on other people and exploit them, and even if they have good intentions, right? Like, they might have some inner trauma or something that they're not aware of that comes out only when they have power, and all that tricky shit. This is part of why I believe in like playing very long games and being very patient about seeing how people's character unfolds, which I think is one of my, like, it's a thing that often surprises people. Like, I'm very ambitious, but I'm also very patient. And I don't think they're in contradiction. I think it's, if you're serious about the outcomes that you want to achieve, then you should also, optimize for survival, right? Like, you should also make sure that you don't end up kind of in this mad rush to do a thing over a couple of years, and then you accidentally or unrealizingly attract the wrong crowd, and then it all goes to shit. And then it's like, sometimes the outcome is worse than if you just did nothing. And I'm like, oh, that's so tragic. Yeah, it's a very long ramble, but hope it's useful to someone.
Yeah, it sounds like a point you're trying to get across is that any stated value, with your examples of like honesty, curiosity, optimism, those are still subservient to reading the room or understanding like the scene or ecosystem.
Kind of, yeah. I guess, yeah, like, are there values that really exist completely context independently? I'm not so sure. And like, one of my things is like, all advice or all perspective might seem useful. I mean, everything is context dependent to a degree you don't realize until you encounter a different context. So there's like a monkey paw kind of dynamic where whatever is your beloved value, there is some context in which it will screw you, and it's not your fault. It's just that you have your values emerge within some context, and there's some other context in which it's not. And like, it's so funny to me, or like annoying, when people don't see this. Like, like, just the principles that make sense in peacetime might not be the same principles that make sense in wartime, right? And I think there was this, was it Kant? I don't know, like some philosopher way back, like, oh, should you never tell lies? And then they're like, yeah, you should always tell the truth. Okay, then what if a murderer shows up and says, where's your friend? I want to murder him. Should you tell him? And they're like, oh, am I violating my principle? Like, is that really so difficult to live? I don't know if I'm being like dismissive when I think that, but like, yeah, I think humans should be flexible to some degree. But then people say, oh, then it's a slippery slope. Where do you draw a line? Do you start with, okay, I will lie, I'm willing to lie to a murderer about my friend, but what if the person is not a murderer, but like they're, you start kind of make the exploitation less and less direct and more like, oh, secondary effects. And then that's how you get corporations that kind of, without trying to do anything terrible, just trying to maximize profit. And then you have like subcontractors who have plausible deniability. Some of them do terrible shit, and then you pretend you didn't have anything to do with them. Some of them have disproportionately good outcomes, and then you take credit for it, and then yeah, there's all of that mess. But and then I mean, I guess ultimately you have to live with yourself. You know, that's a great Montaigne line about like all the fancy words won't help you when you're on your deathbed and you have to ask yourself, did I live a good life? Like you know whether you did or not. So
I'm curious, do you think love is beholden to these rules about being context specific and ways it can be
yeah,
corrupted?
I mean, what is love, right? Like, and yeah, it's people. I've seen conversations on Twitter timeline about like, oh, have you ever experienced unconditional love? Eh, it's I guess it's worth thinking about, and but like, it's a question from a place of luxury, maybe. I don't know if this is me being kind of Asian and like having the shadow of like colonization and war on my mind. But like, when shit gets bad, I'm reminded of this I don't know if it's a joke or a prank or like fiction or whatever, but like there's this guy who, I think there's a family, it's like a mom and two kids in a car, and then like this person in a masked hood shows up and with a gun, and like he tells the mom like, you have to choose one of your kids. Right? And the mom's like, no, I can't do that, like, I love them both. And then they're like, either you choose one or I kill both. Then the mom's like, okay, I choose this one. And then the masked guy turns to the kids and be like, do with that information what you will. And then he leaves. It's so fucked up, right? But like, yeah, like most of us would never be in that scenario, so you don't have to. I mean, it's a terrible thing, but like there is a lot of stuff like that, and it's very. Where am I going with this? So you asking, is love beholden to the? I would say, yeah. Hopefully it doesn't. So I guess the ideal of love is and justice and everything is that we would like a world in which everyone's needs are met, everyone's taken care of. No one needs to feel alone. No one needs to feel deprived and exploited and all of that. But we do not have sufficient resources, or so resources in the broadest, vaguest sense, right? Like we don't like just. Perhaps we have enough resources on some dimension, but the way we distribute that is somehow broken. And so how we manage that, there's a tension between, like, you could say maybe even just tension between love and fear, right? Or like the tension between um the ideal that we would like to live and the practical reality. And then even just being married and like loving your wife and having a job and like having obligation, like there's that thing where, oh, I love my wife, but like we want to have kids and we want to provide for those kids, I need to work, and then you work harder, and then that you get swept up in that because you want to provide for your family, and then you're distant and vacant and not at home, and then your spouse feels unloved, and there's like this tragedy where the thing that you think you're trying to do ends up kind of being in the way. And that like seems to be a fractal across everything. So again, like I don't want to be dismissive. So this is kind of like a goo for my prickly friends, prickles for my gooey friends kind of thing, where like there are times where your good feelings are not enough to ensure survival / continuity of some context, right? Like you have to provide for your family, but being kind of clinically utilitarian then kills the thing that you want, so there's that dynamic tension there again, and we are again brought back to like this how do you live that tension, right? Because it's, you try your best, and you try to continually improve circumstances and conditions such that you have more space for love, right? Or for that kind of freedom. But yeah, like freedom isn't free, right? So it's a quote, right? Like there's a truth to that.
Okay. Yeah, that was super thorough.
Indeed.
Yeah. Let's go on to your next tweet.
Mhm.
On May 15th, 2021, you tweeted, "It's good to have a lot of experience with failure in many domains because then you develop the instincts for failing gracefully."
Hmm. Yes, that is true. Yeah, it's one of the quotes that my boss Dinesh, my ex-boss, we once had like this everybody write a blog post day at work, like just as a slight semi-bonding fun event kind of thing. And for his blog post, he wrote something that I at the time I thought was very bleak. He's basically like, oh, life's gonna kick your ass, everything's worse than you think it is. And success is about going from failure to failure with undiminished enthusiasm. I was like, whoa, bro, that's so, and I saw a similar slide from some academic who's like, working on a PhD is hard, it's lonely, you're gonna feel miserable all the time. Know that you're not the first person to struggle, and good luck, something like that. And I was just like, damn, you people are bleak as shit, and years later I look back and I'm like, oh, actually there is a kindness and a optimism, so that doesn't sound optimistic, right? But like, it in its truthful nature, in its truth and in its determination to persist, there's a deeper optimism in that than in like stating nice sounding platitudes and then giving up, right? Which, and again, like lots of people give up on things all the time. But yeah, so I've come to appreciate failure more and more. Like, you don't, it's true that you don't learn anything from success. You think you do. You have some sense of, oh, I succeeded because X. Maybe not. You really only find, like there's a saying, like you find out who your friends are when you're down, right? Or when you're in difficulty and you need help. And failure is really, and like, in the broader sense, like we have a unfortunately dysfunctional relationship with failure because we feel shame, I think, as a species, like embarrassment at getting things wrong. But when you look to people who resemble enlightenment, right? Like so in music, for example, Victor Wooten talks about like embrace, like, you make a wrong note on when you're playing music. There's a right note on either side of that wrong note, so you can slide the note up or down, and it sounds good. But the mistake that a lot of people make, so like the meta mistake, is that when they make what they perceive to be a mistake, they flinch. They're like, oh fuck, I fucked up. And you can see it in their body, you can see it, and like it throws them off their playing. And so there's the mistake, and then the context around the mistake entrenches it as a mistake. Whereas the reason like really good musicians don't seem to make any mistakes is that one is that they're better at it, but like also when they do make mistakes, they slide up or down very effortlessly, so that it doesn't even seem like a mistake. And then when you get really advanced at that, it's like you can just do anything you want. And same for when you're speaking, you misspeak, you repeat a word or something, or you use the wrong grammar, but you just flow with it, just keep going, and like the audience doesn't notice that there was a mistake because you're already on to the next thing. And we should be like that with, theoretically we could be like that with almost everything, right? We just learn and learn from our mistakes, and but the way we set up our society, and probably for good reasons, but like the way we are right now is that so that's what failing gracefully is. Like when you make a mistake, you slide into the next thing, because you don't turn that mistake into like a shrine, or like a like you don't focus on the mistake and make it a capital M mistake. Like, oh, here's where I fucked up and I'm so miserable and we should all be whatever. Like no, you can just fail gracefully. You can, and there's other layers to it as well. It's like, don't start a business with a lot of like borrowed capital or whatever before you even know that the business idea works, right? So that way, if you can try a small version of it, you think you want to start a restaurant, like start like a pop-up booth or something and see if people actually like your food. Because what if they don't? What if they don't and you just spend like $1 million, and you could just spend a weekend. And a lot of people make this mistake. It's wild. It's because I think there's this sense of, if you want something badly enough with all your heart, then like, and this is partially it's a fairy tale problem, right? Like if you want something badly enough with all your heart, like there's some, I don't know, universe sweepstakes or something that's obliged to give it to you. It's not. Just because you want something really bad doesn't mean you're gonna have it. And it's worthwhile to understand how and why failures happen so that you can dance with them. I love this thing about, if you are driving, there's this driving instructor who's like, the first thing he tells his students to do is to mount the curb deliberately, like drive up the sidewalk, so that you know what it feels like, you know what it happens when you do, and you're not like anxious about that happening. And yeah, so that's an example of like graceful failure. And like, yeah, do wrong things on purpose. Like I had a friend who his first Substack post blew up amazingly, and then after that it's like, how do I follow that up? Like whatever I do is going to be underwhelming and people are going to expect so much. So I'm like, why don't you just do a bad post on purpose? Just get it out of the way. Like you're already so worried about it going to be bad. Just be like, hi everyone, I'm the author of the first hit post that everyone loved, and I'm gonna now waste your time with some nonsense, and then just hear some nonsense. When people have that expectation, or like imagine telling like you got a crush on someone, and you're afraid of going on a bad date. Like go on a bad date on purpose. I think it's likelier to accidentally be a good date than trying to go on a good date and like you're so anxious about trying to make it good that it just feels stiff, right? That sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, this helps with I think some context I was missing from the tweet itself. It's that having a lot of experience with a failure and learning from every failure helps you develop the instincts for failing gracefully.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next tweet. On August 17th, 2021, you tweeted, "Whatever it is that you do, it's almost always worth getting good at talking to people."
Yes, that's true. I think that's almost a direct lift from a Derek Sivers idea, which is like, your next great opportunity is going to come from someone you know. So get out there and know people, get to know people. Because again, like all wealth comes from specialization and trade. And, to trade with people, you need to know people, right? Like just people we are a social species, and information and opportunity and everything is distributed across the social graph. And, you can make a living just arbitraging social graphs, and people do, right? There's like middlemen, and some of the tragic stories in the world are like, especially in like rural countries or whatever, there's like some guy who acts as a middleman between like a village and the city, and he just exploits the fuck out of them. He's like, because they don't know anything about the city and he knows everything, and so he like overcharges them or he takes their money or whatever. And that's sad, that's tragic. But I also think like, why is that even possible? And it's because this person is a limited resource in plugging in some social graph into some other social graph, right? So bridge nodes are very valuable. If you think about, some of the things people talk about are like, oh, why are athletes paid more than nurses or teachers? That's so unethical and wrong. Well, every athlete is actually a media star, and you get to be a media star because the media is a very large network. And like when you're playing at the World Cup level or whatever, it's like you get to reach a very large audience, and if the very large audience of millions and millions of people give you $1, then you have millions and millions of dollars. It doesn't mean you're a better or worse person, but you are benefiting from a distributed network. And that's such a simple truth that I feel people don't recognize, and it drives me a bit mad that it's you just need to solve for distribution. You just like if you've done anything halfway decent, right? If you have a 3 out of 5 stars book, and like 10% of people who read it like it, so you can be rich from that. You just then need to get that in front of you. I mean, hopefully you have the sensibility of an author who loves his work and wants to make it good and wants to whatever. But like, again, what's the point of, not what's the point? Like you can live a happy life, selling to a small crowd. But I would say to someone who's like afraid of getting to a larger audience or whatever, like you don't need to water yourself down to reach a larger audience. You can, in fact, let's say you have 100 readers and you like 10 of them because they do great comments. You can seek out more people like those 10 people in a bigger city or a bigger context or whatever. So you can use distribution to seek out esoteric, outlier, rare kind of people, and do the thing that you want to do even more so. And I think it's intuitive in like the sense of a large city which has a large population is better able to sustain markets for like obscure things. Like you can't, you can't have like a anime shop in like a tiny village in some country, right? There's just not enough anime fans in that place. So you need to go somewhere where like a larger, like to have a Comic-Con or whatever, like you need some group of people. And so yeah, it's just so obvious to me. It's like, oh my God, like you need to solve for distribution to you can do anything you want if you solve for distribution. Basically, that's basically it. Like anything you like people say, oh, you can't, nobody wants to pay for poetry. Nobody that you know, right? But that's just like the world is huge. There's more people alive than seconds in your life, So it's like literally any time that you spend with someone who doesn't get you, doesn't like you, doesn't understand you, it's time that you're not spending finding the people who do. And I would think that I have a pretty decent understanding of that, and I myself still sometimes fall into the trap of like, oh no, this guy doesn't like my tweet, like I should explain to him why he should, like fuck that, like just like next, move on. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a great primer explanation on the value of like networks, connecting people, and distribution. But I mean, the tweet you say it's almost always worth getting good at talking to people. So I was curious to know, like, in your view, what makes someone good at talking to people?
Oh, right. And actually, so yeah, that's a good catch. Like, if you're bad at talking to people, you can talk to a million people and go nowhere, right? Because none of them like you, right? So you do wanna, so that would be the equivalent of like if you write a 1 out of 5 star book, right? So I did say 3 out of 5, so this is good enough for some people. But if you're bad at it and like nobody likes it, then you try to talk to lots of people and it's just like nobody likes it faster or more, And yeah, so what makes people good at talking to people? Conversation is a back and forth. I really think that so I've talked about good reply game elsewhere. And like the most intuitive way I can think of phrasing it is really passing a ball back and forth. Like I think everyone, like children do that even if they don't have language. You can play fetch with a dog, right? Like you throw the ball, the dog gets it, it comes back, and then you have that you're having a conversation with your dog with regards to where you toss the ball, right? And like you don't toss it somewhere, like out the window, I don't know, somewhere that you can't reach it, because then now the game's over, right? And if you just kind of roll it right in front of you, I mean, I guess if your dog loves you, he'll just return you the ball every time. But like when you're trying to have fun with someone of playing a game of ball pass, right? You want to try and keep it interesting, right? You want to get to some distance, like, okay, let's play kind of, you go further back, I go further back, let's see how far we can go, and then let's come back, let's go fast in a circle with a bunch of guys. Like you try and find some frame in which the ball passing is fun, right? And then that's, I guess that's just one dimension of it. And so conversation is more complex than passing a ball, but like if you fail on that dimension, you can't get to play the other dimensions, right? So once you have that rapport and you pass the ball back and forth, and I did do a tweet recently where even that is not necessarily always the case, because between nerds, right, like sometimes we have this thing where, oh, you see this guy, he's like juggling and he's doing really well, and like you let him keep going in a context where people are supportive, because anyway, that's actually just, I mean, the point of that is that even traditional principles that work in general, sometimes there are specific cases where you can violate it and it's actually still good. Like so a general good reply game thing is be polite, but between close friends, like you might enjoy being rude to each other as a sense of intimacy. And I love to swear with my friends, and like the more you see me swearing with someone, the likelier it is that the closer we must be. Whereas like I try to be as polite as possible with people that I don't like, so that anyway. So good reply game between close friends can look like bad reply game to someone who doesn't know that they're friends. But so yeah, what makes someone good at conversations with other people? You have to be interested in the other person, and like most people, well, I don't know about most people, but like a lot of people are so anxious about saying what they have to say that they might not have, and they are so concerned about how they're being received and all of those things, that they don't have like the bandwidth to notice how the other person is doing, right? And so, like the best questions very much are well, so in your case, like you've prepared stuff, so that's thoughtful, right? So the other thing is like in casual conversation, the best questions in casual conversation tend to be follow-up questions where you ask someone something and they're talking, and then you notice that they're like, and then they have some side reaction to something. They might not even realize that they had that side reaction. And if you're attentive and you notice that they had that side reaction, you can be like, hey, you kind of laughed about that there, like, what's up with that? Or like you kind of you looked away and you seem to be thinking about something. What were you thinking? And when you invite that into the so like previously the conversation was like in this narrow bandwidth of, oh, here we are, like, how's the weather, how's it going, blah blah blah. And then when you witness an opening like that and you're attentive to it and you ask about it warmly, they themselves may not realize that they wanted to talk about something that was on their mind or they were feeling and they didn't even know. And then now that that's invited, the like bandwidth of that conversation expands, or like this area in which that's happening expands. And that the expansion of shared understanding is kinship. It's a sense of people feel closer to each other once they've had a conversation like that. And you can seek that out. And you can't force it when someone else doesn't want it. And if you're trying to force a thing and they're not feeling it, then the bandwidth narrows and they feel like, what the fuck is this guy? I can't wait to get away from this like person who is trying to force some shit. So I think that's the heart of it. I think good conversation is, well, again, there's many dimensions to it. One is interest, paying attention to the other person. The other is just flowing towards whatever is generally interesting. But even then, you figure out what's interesting in the conversation from seeing how the other person is relating and is responding. And that is why, like, so I actually kind of get slightly anxious about like audio only phone calls, because you can't see how the person is relating to what you're saying, right? And it's very, I say a thing and then I wait for you to respond, and it's like I get a bit something about that. But yeah, when you can see how a person breathes, even sometimes you see someone, you're talking and you see the person, like there's all these micro nuances that being willing to be attentive to those things, I think is where a lot of the magic is.
Yeah, it sounds like attention, curiosity, and also just like being in the overlap of what, if it's a two-person conversation, what both A and B are interested in. Because if you have like A say something that B doesn't care about, or vice versa, then one person might be checked out. So you want to stay in like overlap of what you both want to talk about.
Correct.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. Next tweet, on March 5th, 2022, you tweeted, "What would you do if you were 10 times more brave than you are now?"
Yes. I do think that courage is one of the final bottlenecks. I usually say either courage or imagination, and they're both kind of intertwined, because it's hard to have imagination when you're scared, and it's brave to imagine things, but like most people, I think, struggle with a courage deficit or imagination deficit. And so asking people to imagine what it would be like if they were more brave, right? I think it's a service, because sometimes people think, oh, if I was more brave, I would do X, and then they start and they don't imagine X until they are invited to. And in the process of imagining, they may find that, oh, I actually don't need to be all that brave to do it. It's just that, at some level, subconsciously, I've been like keeping that from myself and from my sphere of possibility, right? And yeah, I think you can do a service to the world by just inviting people to imagine beautiful things, or imagine, like just possibility.
For you, is there anything you think in your life right now that this applies to you, where you're keeping something out of your own?
So many things, so even I would say not writing fiction is a part of that. Like there's some part of me that's afraid of a bunch of outcomes, and I think they are rational fears, but like it can be dealt with, and it's another one of my tweets that I like is that I've been very touched to see people continuing to quote it, even though I don't personally share that much, is people think they lack time or maybe courage. So in the tweet it says time, but people think they lack time, but often what they lack is an supportive context. And so courage is not necessarily like a solo one player game. It's we can give each other courage by encouraging each other. People say encourage and they don't think what the word means. We can give each other courage by having someone feel, oh, there's someone rooting for me. There's someone who cares about how I perform on this thing. They would like to see me succeed. And so we can encourage each other, and we can provide supportive contexts for people to do more things. And a simplistic frame, I don't know if I entirely believe this, but probably yes. I don't know, let me just say it, is that maybe it's true that, if you think about it this way, like you think of all the things you want to do and all the ways in which you haven't done the things that you think you want to do, and then think of it as like a supportive context deficit. So like if you were sufficiently supported en route to doing the things you want to do, you would be likely to do them. Yeah, I don't know how I might workshop that for a bit, because I'm not sure precisely what I mean by that, but it's like, like so I guess one extreme thing is like, oh, if I had a personal trainer and if I had a dietitian, blah blah blah, then I would get fit. Like there is probably a truth in that. I mean, some people will be like, you don't actually need all of those things to get started. Like, yeah, but it's painful and scary and challenging to do the thing without support, right? And mayhaps right, like if such people got together and supported each other, they would be able to achieve the thing that they think they can't achieve. And but that brings us back to like what we were talking about earlier in the conversation about like scenes and stated values and encouraging people. Like some people, you try and encourage them and they don't want it, so but again, like you don't worry so much about those people, and you look for the people who do want to be encouraged, because people who do want to be encouraged, when you do encourage them, they are so grateful for it, and then you have kinship, right? And that's great. But yeah, I try to be brave where I can, but I'm still human, and there are things that I'm still afraid of, and it's dealing with fear is not as simple as saying, oh, I'm no longer afraid. I mean, if it feels true, then that's done. But usually I think fears are kind of embedded in memory and experience and feelings, and it's complex stuff. And it could be you meet some person who you're inspired by and they're like, nah, that's all bullshit. Like, so you can imagine there's like two different people saying that's all bullshit. One could be saying it from a place of love and support, and you're like, you know what, you're right, shit, fuck, I'm gonna do the thing. And someone else says, nah, that's all bullshit, and you're like, fuck you, guy, like I'm gonna kick your ass, like how dare you like come in and tell me what I can and cannot do, right? So that is interesting to think about. I don't know if I remember it. Let me make a note to remember. What did I just say? People, that's not real. Oh my god, so true versus oh my god, fuck you. Yeah.
Yeah, saying from a place of love versus like a place of hate. Yeah.
Right. So you think like a good coach like is sensitive to the limits of their player's ability, but the player has to believe that the coach has the player's best interests in mind and is actually trying to help them and all of those things. And there's something of a resonance in supportive context that invites the player to kind of go past their constraint nexus, if that makes sense. Like go past their existing, the way that they're holding themselves, right? Which is a safety ritual / mechanism. So like if someone can nudge you out of your comfort zone, basically, right? Or your I mean, it's interesting. Again, we hear the phrase comfort zone so often that we don't think about what exactly it means. But it's a protection, almost like a spell, like a magical protection stave to keep you safe. And you need courage to go out of that comfort zone, which is scary and painful and difficult. And you have to have a reason for going. Or I think it's uncommon that people leave homeostasis for no reason, right? Like we're evolved to be safe and to risk time and effort and resources and all those things for no reason. Like that doesn't seem like, I mean, it can happen by accident, right? Like, so like circumstances may shift in a way that like catapults you out of your comfort zone. And that's usually what happens. That's like heroes' journeys usually start like that. Like some bad shit happens, like you like your village, but like, oh, there's a dragon or there's some nonsense that's, sets you off on the path, right? So yeah. And something very interesting here. I should yeah, I gotta think about it. It's interesting.
Yeah, the highlight for me from all of that is that idea that sounds like encouragement can be a sort of bravery generator or like fear
Yes.
suppressant. Same effect where
Yes.
if you have the right people with the right your interests in
Correct.
mind, like they're being good faith, truly
Very true.
want to see
Yeah.
your best interests in mind, that can make you be more brave. Just other
Right.
people kind of doing it for you.
If you remember when Vibe Camp happened, like there were a whole bunch of people who were reporting that they felt so something, right? Like they felt some strange expansion of and it's just that it's the presence of a supportive context that they had not experienced before. And like a lot of people, and in some ways you could say that the malaise of society, modernity or whatever, is that people just don't experience supportive context. It's actually very sad when you think about it. It's like people deserve to be supported, like really seen and heard and trusted and believed in and encouraged and challenged appropriately in the ways they want to be challenged. Like it shouldn't be so rare, and so that's like we try and do it for ourselves and each other. And if we do it well amongst ourselves, we can teach other people to do it just by osmosis. So even just seeing it happen can inspire people to try it amongst themselves. And that's just such a tremendous gift we can give people and ourselves, right? Just to see it happen and spread. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and like one of the main tools, at least in the modern era, that's brought about this whatever dissolution of the supportive context, shared context, like the internet. I think a lot of like thoughtful, intentional people are using that same tool to like try and regenerate it, to bring back nourishing, supportive context and scenes. Yeah, it's cool. Like the same tool can be like both used for like destruction and like regeneration.
Yeah, I think that's always the case, right? Like so anything that has power, right? So power to effect something. It can always every tool can also be a weapon in some ways, right? And so the more powerful it is, the more good and bad you can do with it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. Kind of speaking of that idea, next tweet. On May 23rd, 2022, you tweeted, "The knowledge that people reward crisis resolvers more than crisis averters is a bit of a moral info hazard."
Yeah, it is. Because you then know that you will be rewarded for heroics more than you'll be rewarded for, like we don't have a monument to the guy who invented the seatbelt. We should. The number of life saves insane, right? But like we don't we don't really care. Just narrative wise, it's one of those tricky, sad things about, again, like the guy, like the guy the vaccine for polio, Salk. I think so I vaguely know his name. I should know him. We should be celebrating our like the heroes of that, right? Like, but like we are much more. I mean, I guess to be kinder to ourselves, we are running like ape OS, like we are a bunch of monkeys, and it takes so the work of culture, I think, is to think and feel. It's almost, oh, this is good. It's funny. I can witness a good like thought or a tweet cross my mind. It's not really. I don't feel like I wrote it. You just got to witness me. So like the challenge for culture is to consider what is best for society or for humanity, and then adapt our operating system of emotions and storytelling and whatever to converge on that towards a better end, right? So there are things that are not sexy that are very important, and we have this monkey brain that likes things that are sexy and doesn't like things that are not sexy. But we do have this prefrontal cortex of being able to kind of bridge the two, right? We get to make unsexy things sexy in a sense. So yeah, I guess so. The point of culture is to find the good unsexy things and make them sexy in a sense, right? Like yeah, that's a good thought, isn't it not? I don't think I phrased it like that before, but it sounds like a good thought.
Yeah. Sorry to see whatever tweet comes from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's the whole thing, right? Let's like take fashion. Like whatever, high-waisted, low-waisted, one's sexy, one's not, then something flips, and then those two valences flip as well. Like we just choose kind of in a way what's seen as like valuable or high status or sexy and what isn't. But yeah, I'm curious, like with this info hazard in mind, do you have any ideas like what to do, like how to like make that shift, even just like locally or in what capacity you can? Like how do we? I guess we wouldn't want to de-elevate the crisis resolvers, but how do we elevate the crisis averters to get closer to the rewards that the resolvers are lavish with?
Like asking me how to do it. Like I mean,
Just any ideas? Yeah.
I mean, so I guess at the simplest level is just storytelling, right? Like just tell stories about those heroes in a sense. And I've talked elsewhere about like how the job of a king, right, is to allocate, or one of the jobs of the king is to allocate the honor economy or the status economy of his people. And so the king can say, I hereby honor this person as a hero. And people are like, oh, okay, like why did he do it? Like the king can say, here is a monument. I'm the installer of monuments, right? Like that's what the king's jobs. Here's a monument to the seatbelt guy. Like this person has saved so many lives, and then you write a song about it or whatever. And the thing there is to decide on what is good in life, right? That's the yeah. So at the very least, and you don't necessarily need some grand, like every person is monarch of their own life, right? So we can each decide who we want to honor and why. And someone could get a tattoo of the guy. I mean, it's just simplistically, I get a tattoo of the guy who came up with it, and then people ask, who's that guy? It's like, oh, let me tell you the story of so and so. You're like, oh wow, I didn't think of it that way.
I'm imagining like a tattoo of the seatbelt like across someone's waist. So maybe it comes like an intimate context. The partner's like, wait, what is this? And like, all right, hold on, let me interrupt and tell you this diatribe about the inventor of the seatbelt. Yeah. Storytelling is I don't know, like everyone loves stories, so I think that's like good to hear. That's your sort of best estimate for how to tackle that info hazard. Okay. Next tweet. On December 22nd, 2022, you tweeted, I assume that people are interested in having fantastic conversations until they actively demonstrate otherwise.
That was me probably being frustrated with irritating people, actually. there's a whole class of tweet that I do when I'm annoyed with people that is either a reaffirmation of what I'm trying to focus on. And so very often when I I periodically retweet focus on what you want to see more of. And it's often when I see people focusing on stupid shit, I'm like, God, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna retweet that again. So similarly, it's like there are like, so I think somebody was replying some stupid shit in my mentions, and I wanted to say, like, so my instinct response is, wow, I just tweeted the thing and I just got a stupid response. I'll get to it later. So I just tweeted the job of culture is to make sexy things, unsexy things, and sexy, and then some idiots like, oh, not really. It's about formalizing the transmission of ideas and traditions. Like you're not listening to what I'm trying to say, fucking idiot, right? But I can't tweet that. Like, I can say that in person, and you can see that I'm laughing, and you can see that it's not a big deal. But like, if you tweet that, people are gonna read it in a hostile voice, and I want to write a whole essay about that. Like, people reading it in a hostile voice leads to compounding hostility, and so that's part of why I don't say fucking idiot to people in tweets, because they're gonna read it much worse than I meant it. And so that's part of why my main is the voice is kind of a certain way. But did you ask me something? Oh yeah, so I assume people want to have fantastic conversations. It's just a reminder to myself that I don't have to allow norms to dictate my behavior. So just because people are talking like idiots doesn't mean I have to descend to their level, and you get to actually talk past someone to where you want to go. Like, so it's funny, there's this whole like skill set that's associated with like narcissistic sociopath types, which is like, or like like politicians or whatever. Like you ask them a question and then they don't like the question, so they don't answer it and they just say something else. And you can actually use that skill set for good. Like when you're dealing with someone who is being belligerent or difficult and whatever. Like, and I've seen people do this very beautifully. Like somebody says something offensive and then they say, oh, I'm sure you didn't mean to be Like, you know that they actually meant to be offensive, but you say something like, "Oh, I'm sure you're far too like you praise a hypothetical version of them. I'm sure you didn't mean to say such a clueless thing. Like I'm sure you would have preferred to say something else." Then so you kind of give them an out, right? Like you redirect them to something else. And in some ways, that's kind of rude. Like you're disregarding what they're saying, but you're giving them an out, right? So um yeah, so I just wanted to remind myself. And it's funny that you said that, and then because that's directly applicable to the thing that I just did. Like it just happened. Like if you go and see my Twitter right now, I tweeted the tweet, and someone's like, I said a thing, and they're like, not really, it's something else. And I'm like, fuck you. Like you don't, it's terrible. But yeah, so I have to carry the conversation for everyone sometimes, because people.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's, with someone of an account your size, many tweets are just going to get at least one bad reply. And it's so funny with that example too, because I forget what you said the replier said, but it could just have been something like, instead of no, they could have said yes and, or how would you think about whatever else they said. Like, there's so many ways to like just not be so hostile as they were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, funny.
All right. That was all the tweets I had discussed with you today. But before we wrap up, I would love to know, what are your favorite things about your Twitter experience?
My favorite things about my Twitter experience, I mean, so the fact that we can transmit thoughts at the speed of light, across the whole planet, and receive responses from other people. I don't know if it was I think it might have been Steve Wozniak, or at this point I might have I think it was Steve Wozniak who said something like he was learning like ham radio with his dad. I'm not sure if this anecdote is correct, but and when you're a child and you have this device and you tinker with it, and then I think you transmitted a message on some frequency, and he got a response from like the captain of some ship off the shore, or just so you have this device and you can communicate with someone else who is like important. Or I mean, from the child's perspective, it's not that the child wants status or whatever, right? It's just that, oh wow, like here's a real person who's like responding to me supportively. And it's just in that moment you feel that, oh, I am a part of this world. I am part of the goings on of the world. And I still enjoy that every day, like being able to connect with people and being able to think a thought and receive thoughts in response instantaneously across the planet for basically free. I can still access like the romance of that, like the sheer beauty. Like so many people are using it to just say stupid shit, which is tragic, but the underlying potential and beauty of it. And so like earlier this year I went to San Francisco again for the second time, and like I had friends pick me up at the airport and drive me to their home and let me stay at their place. And then had another friend who I also stayed at their place, and they drove me to the airport back. And I'm like just so emotional that my tweets, I've been just me tapping on my screen, nightmare rectangles, right? Me tapping on a piece of glass has led to me being hosted in the homes of people halfway across the planet. Like that is, a connection and a supportive context, right? There's a beauty in that I continue to be like entranced by. It's the promise of that is still so romantic to me. Like wow, like we get to live that in that world. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That all that you just said, and also your more like intention here to like write more essays more regularly next year. This has me thinking, if you've thought about, I'm sure you do this like maybe subconsciously or to some degree already, but if you thought about writing essays as like an intentional response to other existing essays, like nourishing some like scene of like, communication through essays, like if something inspires you to write a lengthy response, like, I don't know, I was curious about your thoughts on that.
Wait, so, sorry, what inspires me to write a lengthy response?
I'm curious if you had the idea of like writing an essay as a response to another essayist or some other essay.
Oh, it hasn't happened recently. So I used to do that when I was like blogging in the early days. Like it does, I think it's flattering when you write an essay and someone else responds with an essay of their own, even if they're like disagree. If the disagreement is thoughtful, I think that can be flattering. If the disagreement is shit, it's still I know it's haters are fans too kind of way. It's still engaging. So if you want engagement and you're a nobody, like responding to someone's essay is a great way to do it. In my case, right now where I'm at, I mean I'll probably do it but like I'm more mindful of like choosing the right thing to respond to if like I would have to see something that I feel merits a response in a sense. Like I do have my own vision that I want to enact, and so I'm not exactly like going on the lookout specifically for essays to respond to, but if I see something that I feel, did like I would like to expand on, or I would like to reference or whatever, then yeah, I would do that. But yeah, I want to be wary of not being like an ambulance chaser, like kind of like, oh, like what's essay is going viral now? Oh, I'm gonna respond to that. Oh, I mean, if you keep your values straight and you know what your goals are and you can keep those things in mind, then it is sensible to quote unquote ambulance chase, as long as you're doing it for the right reasons and in a way that's true to your vision. But yeah, I don't specifically think about it.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious. That spurred the idea from your answer there. All right. Yeah, that was it. Thanks so much for talking to me today, Visa. Have a great rest of your day.
Nice. Thanks. It's fun.
All right. Take care.